Hello. How are you? Are you here to take questions? Is that the drill?
Your podium.
What's that?
It's your podium.
Oh, it's my podium. Oh, well, I'm just. They just asked me to come down here to take a few questions, and be happy to take whatever questions you have, if you have it.
I got a question. Would there be a role in the Republican Party today for Barry Goldwater or Ronald Reagan?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, I would say that those two gentlemen are certainly two of the shoulders that we stand upon as a Republican Party, and represent, I'd say, actually fairly close to where I think the Republican Party needs to be going if we're going to be successful as a party going forward. And, so yeah, I think not only do they have a place, they would be preeminent figures in the party.
So you think Barry Goldwater's libertarian viewpoint would be a leadership role today?
Barry Goldwater evolved into a libertarian. I don't think you would say that Barry Goldwater in 1964 was a libertarian. I think a lot of his libertarianist views developed over time, actually later in his life. But I think the Goldwater conservatism of limited government, personal responsibility, is certainly still at the core of the Republican Party, and I think the Reagan expansion of that into a broader-based coalition was something that was an important evolution. Anybody else?
With the creation of your new political action committee in Iowa, I mean, is that a first step to moving for a 2012 campaign?
I've been very open about this. I want to be involved in the 2012 process. I'm very concerned that we have a strong candidate to take on President Obama in 2012, and that candidate reflects the broad base of the Republican Party and appeals to all aspects of the party. And that we have people out there talking about the issues that energize the entire base of the party. And so I'm going to continue to be out there. I'm going to be involved in Iowa, and be involved not just in Iowa, but across the country, in making sure that our candidates are, as I have been in 2010, supporting candidates so we can get elected and get the first step in the process of retaking this country back for the founding principles of which it has served. These principles have served so well and have brought us the great success we have. And then in 2012, finish the job with hopefully stronger majorities in the House and Senate and the President.
Is there anyone being tossed around for 2012 right now, other than yourself, you would consider endorsing?
No, not at this point. I mean, I would say that I want to be involved in the process. If there was someone who I was particularly enthralled with, I probably wouldn't be, contemplating getting into the race, which, as I've been very clear about that, that's something I'm considering. And we'll wait and see how this all folds out after the election and into the early part of next year, and I'll make a decision at that point. And looking at how it works for me as from a family perspective, personal perspective, as well as what I think I can bring to the table going into 2012, and part of that is who's at the table. Yeah.
Looking at the current Senate leadership, do you anticipate the possibility of a shakeup or a change in the Republican leadership? Would you go out on a limb and say who you might vote for?
Well, I wouldn't support anybody. That's an internal matter, number one. Number two, I think it's going to be hard if Republicans make significant gains to change horses after you've made those gains. Usually you change horses after you lose, not after you win. And so I think that will probably be the case both in the House and the Senate. I think, having said that, there should be, and I think will be, increased pressure to make sure that there are folks who went through the fire of 2010 who are represented in leadership. And having been there and in leadership for 6 years and beating my head against the door many, many times during that 6-year period of time, trying to fight for conservative principles and legislation and votes, just to get votes on conservative matters, you need a conservative voice in leadership, at least one, hopefully a majority. And that is something that I would hope at some point in the leadership that we would see some folks who went through this process in this election cycle, not necessarily a freshman, but it could be a freshman, who is in the leadership, who is making sure that that perspective is heard. Because remember, roughly, maybe depending on how the elections turned out, but roughly 2/3 of the people in the Republican caucus and Democratic caucus weren't up for election this time. And so while they can see from afar what happened, as we all know, it's a big difference when you're sort of watching it and living it. And I think we need to have some folks who lived it to have a voice in the next 2 years.
So does that mean you would say support like a Joe Miller, Rand Paul, or Christine O'Donnell in the Senate leadership?
As I said, I'm not too sure it has to be a freshman member, but it can be someone who is up for election this cycle. I mean, it could be someone like a Pat Toomey. I'll put a plug in for the Pennsylvania guy. It could be someone like a Pat Toomey, or it could be someone like a Richard Burr, or someone like a David Vitter, somebody like that who was up for this year, who was involved in at least originally, was considered maybe a tough election, and experienced what, having been out there on the trail, interacting with the dynamics that are going on in the country right now on a very personal level, and reflect that in the leadership.
There's been a very, at least, anti-establishment Republican message being tossed around at this convention and in the Tea Party in general. Are you concerned that if you decide to make the 2012 run, that's going to maybe affect your relationship with party leaders?
I mean, one of the things that I'm very comfortable with, if I decide to move forward, is I think my record speaks for itself. I don't think anyone would say that I was a part of the old boy network, that the way Republicans did things in Washington, D.C. I was always the fly in the ointment, the guy that everybody was complaining about because I was complaining to them about the way things were done. So, no, I feel very comfortable that my record leadership on conservative issues that were not necessarily popular issues, not necessarily things that the leaders wanted to see voted on or done, actually gives me gives people a perspective of what kind of leader he would be. Yes.
I'd like to correct the lady's previous statement. The Republican Party has not been run down by the Tea Party here. Maybe individual candidates, but not the Republican Party as a whole. And but I do have a question. Do you think there's a possibility of single-issue bills coming through the House? And if so, what chance would they have?
I was actually very encouraged to see John Boehner make the comment that we're going to have smaller bills for two reasons. Number one, large bills mean complexity. Complexity means room for error and government screwing it up. I mean, you see these huge bills. All these huge bills give enormous authority to the regulators and enormous authority to government to do things, and obviously great complexity, none of which is good for the country. And so the idea of having simpler bills that you can actually have members of Congress read, decipher, and understand the implications of what will happen with not just the passage of this language, but how this language will be seen by the regulators, what the regulators are going to have to do as every piece of legislation has an implementation phase. And so to understand and actually think about that, whereas if you're in this huge bill, I mean, it's just too much. You just can't understand all the different provisions, much less what the ramifications in the rulemaking and regulatory process will be from all those provisions. So it really is a great idea to try to take things a bite at a time, as opposed to something in a more omnibus fashion. So I applaud John Boehner for what he's doing. I hope they stick to it.
What's your assessment of the Tea Party movement, and specifically the general tendency among the Tea Party to focus on fiscal matters and defer the conversation on social issues to a later day?
Well, first off, I think I wouldn't be here if I wasn't a fan of the Tea Party and what they're doing. I see them as people who understand that the very foundation of America is at risk right now. Basic understanding of what America is and who we are as a people is really at risk from this huge expansion of government and the taking of our freedoms away from us. So I completely am sympathetic with him. In some respect, as someone who's been out of politics for several years and is feeling pulled to get back in, I sort of see myself in some respects like a Tea Party person. Obviously, most of the folks, well, many of the folks who are here have never been involved in politics, but felt pulled in. I similarly felt pulled in for the reasons that they're here. As far as your second question on, the central issue of the day is the size and scale of the federal government and its impact, I would argue, not just on our economy, although that is the most obvious impact, the debt situation, the economic situation as a result of the government interference. But it's an impact that goes beyond that. It's an impact of fundamental freedoms. It's an impact of the dignity of the human person and the role of the human person in our society as opposed to the role of the government. It's the role of who has rights. Is it the individual or is it the government? Who has the ability to give rights to others? Is it God or is it the government? Those are basic moral issues, really, not just economic issues. And while they're not necessarily put in a moral context, they have a moral context, and I think the Tea Party folks here understand the significance of that moral challenge that we face in the country.
Senator, you've mentioned that you support the House leadership, specifically Congressman Boehner's attempts to get through shorter, smaller bills. Do you support the Pledge to America?
I can't say that I've read the Pledge to America. I certainly, I've read parts of it, I've read the preamble, but I haven't gone through and read the whole thing. I don't see anything in there that I don't support. Let's just put it that way. I didn't see anything in there that I found problematic, and certainly reading through the articles of what's contained in it. So I would say that, generally speaking, if I were running, I would probably be supportive of it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.